Autumn, 1943. Soviet tankers rode into battle knowing they were dead men walking. Their shells bounced harmlessly off German armor, leaving crews to burn alive inside steel coffins. But at that very moment, deep in the rear, an answer was being prepared, one that would force the Wehrmacht elite to forget their superiority and start praying. To create this monster, Marshal Zhukov defied the laws of physics, and designers bet their heads before Stalin. But the darkest secret of this tank lay not in its blueprints. You will learn why this beast slayer was assembled by the hands of the starving, whose skin was left frozen onto the metal. What terrible price was paid in the rear so that, at the front, German tigers would turn into scrap metal from a single blow without even suffering a penetration. Watch to the end. This is not a story about parade ground machinery. This is the story of how a machine, forbidden from open combat in German manuals, was born of blood, mud, and extreme brutality. The screech of steel on steel that bursts capillaries in the eyes, a shower of blinding white sparks burning the retina, a dull, nauseating thud transmitted through the seat directly into the spine. It is not a penetration, it is a ricochet. October 1943, the Eastern Front. A morning soaked in dampness and the smell of burnt diesel. A Soviet gunner in the turret of a T-34 sees a blurred gray silhouette in his sights. Distance, 800 meters. The limit for a reliable shot, but they cannot wait. The 85mm shell leaves the barrel at a speed of nearly 800 meters per second. Physics is on the attacker's side. Mass, acceleration, kinetic energy. But at the other end of the trajectory, physics meets the metallurgy of the Krupp concern. The frontal plate of a German Tiger. 100 millimeters of face-hardened steel. The shell strikes the armor, but does not bite in. It skids, leaving a deep, smoking gouge, and flies off into the sky as a useless piece of red-hot metal. Inside the Soviet tank, a suffocating silence hangs for a second. The crew knows what this means. It is not just a miss. It is a death sentence. "It didn't go through!" The loader's scream breaks into a wheeze. "Ricochet, Commander! Ricochet!" The commander does not answer. He looks through the periscope and sees the angular turret of the German heavy tank begin to turn slowly, with terrifying mechanical inevitability. Behind that armor, there is no panic. There is cold calculation. The German gunner calmly rotates the hand wheels. He has time. He knows his armor can take the hit. He knows that his 88mm gun leaves no chance at this distance. "Reverse!" the commander screams, his voice cracking. "Driver, back it up, to the ravine!" The gearshift lever crunches under the blow of a hand. The engine roars at maximum RPM, spewing clouds of black smoke. The tracks scrape the frozen earth, trying to find a grip, to tear the machine out of the sector of fire. But time has already run out. The German shot sounds like the dry crack of a whip. Impact. Darkness. The autumn of 1943 became a time of technological deadlock. The Red Army was advancing, but the cost of every kilometer was measured in trainloads of burnt iron. The appearance of tigers and panthers on the battlefield nullified the parity. Soviet calibers, 76 and even 85 millimeters, turned into tools for scratching paint. To destroy a German heavy tank, crews had to take deadly risks, closing to pistol range, 300, 200 meters, entering the zone of guaranteed destruction. The German, however, could pick off our machines from 1.5, even 2 kilometers away, remaining in complete safety, as if at a shooting range. This was not a war of maneuver. It was a slaughter, dictated by superiority in armor plate thickness and barrel length. Kubinka Proving Ground, November 1943. A grey, low sky presses down on shoulders. Underfoot lies slushy mud mixed with snow. A group of high-ranking officers stands in a semicircle near a captured Tiger. The tank looks unharmed, aside from a dozen marks on its frontal armor. These are traces of shelling from every cannon currently in service. Marshal Zhukov walks along the side of the machine. His boots imprint heavily into the soil. His face is hard, as if hewn from granite, his eyes narrowed. He is not looking for excuses. He is looking at the results. He runs a gloved hand over a deep dent in the armor. The metal is rough, cold, indifferent. An 85mm shell left a crater here only 3 centimeters deep. The armor is not pierced. The crew inside would have remained alive and combat-ready. "And that is all?" Zhukov's voice is quiet, but in this silence, the officers of his entourage instinctively snap to attention. "We hit them in the forehead, and they only lose paint?" The head of the proving ground, a colonel with eyes red from lack of sleep, takes a step forward. In his hands is a folder of reports, the numbers within screaming of impotence. "Comrade Marshal of the Soviet Union," he begins, trying to keep his voice steady. "Tests conducted have shown the high resistance of German face-hardened armor. Standard armor-piercing shells of 85mm caliber are effective only from a distance of 500 meters or less, and even then, at an angle of impact close to 90 degrees. At real combat ranges, the kinetic energy is insufficient to breach the integrity." Zhukov turns sharply. "Kinetic energy," he interrupts. "I do not care about your physics, Colonel. I care about why our tankers must burn in boxes that cannot protect themselves. I care about why we must lose 3, 4 crews for one of these beasts." He nods at the Tiger. The machine stands as a silent monument to German engineering. Square, heavy, functional. Built to kill. "The Germans have guns that stitch us through from 2 kilometers, Zhukov continues, hammering out every word. "And us? We offer heroism? Heroism is good, but heroism does not pierce 100 millimeters of steel. Only steel pierces steel. Heavier, faster steel." The officers are silent. There is nothing to object to. This is the dry accounting of war. A balance sheet where the currency is human lives and tons of metal. And right now, the balance is not in our favor. Zhukov approaches the next mark. It is a trace from a 122mm shell of the A-19 core gun. Here, the picture is different. The armor is not just dented, it has cracked. The weld seam has burst, the plate has deformed. There is no penetration, but it is clear the metal suffered a colossal shock. This is no longer a mosquito bite. It is a blow from a sledgehammer. "There," the marshal pokes a finger at the crack. "Now that is a conversation. Whose work?" "Core gun A-19, caliber 122mm, the artilleryman reports quickly. "But, Comrade Marshal, that is a field gun. It is enormous, heavy, separate loading, low rate of fire. To shove such a fool into a tank turret is technically impossible. The turret will not withstand the recoil. The turret ring will be torn off at the first shot, and there is no room. The loader will have nowhere to turn around with a shell weighing 25 kilograms. Zhukov slowly turns to the artilleryman. There is no sympathy for technical problems in his gaze. Only the cold will that moves fronts. "Impossible?" he asks. "But dying by the thousands near Kursk, that is possible? Retreating while having the factories of the Urals behind us, that is possible?" He steps right up to the colonel. "We do not need a gun that makes little holes, Colonel. We need a gun that takes the head off. I do not give a damn about the rate of fire. If one shot knocks the spirit out of this German cat along with the crew, then one shot is enough. I need an argument. Heavy. Steel. Final. Zhukov casts a last look at the Tiger. Contact Kotin and Petrov. Let them take the 122 caliber. And let them figure out how to stuff it into a tank. The deadline was yesterday. The wind at the proving ground picks up, throwing wet snow into their faces. The decision is made. The point of no return has been passed. At that moment, amidst the mud and cold metal, the era of equal tank duels ended. The era of the beast slayers began. The task was formulated not as a technical requirement, but as an order for survival. It was necessary to create a machine capable not just of competing, but of dominating. A machine whose mere appearance would force a German ace to forget about the superiority of the Aryan race and remember his prayers. But between the marshal's order and the finished tank lay an abyss of unsolved engineering problems, a lack of technology, and a deficit of time. Shoving a massive howitzer into a cramped turret is like trying to put the heart of a whale into the chest of a wolf. Physics was against it. Strength of materials was against it. Ergonomics screamed of impossibility. But war accepts no excuses. In the design bureaus, lamps were lit that would not go out for months. The race had begun. And the stakes were not bonuses and medals, but the lives of those who would sit in the driver's hatch tomorrow and look into the eyes of death through a narrow vision slit. They needed an answer weighing 46 tons. The marshal's order fell onto the designers' desks like a heavy slab. Deadline: yesterday. At the design bureau of factory number 100, evacuated to Chelyabinsk, this phrase was not a metaphor. It was a mode of existence. Here, among drafting tables and thick tobacco smoke, a battle of its own unfolded. It was quiet, without exploding shells, but the tension exceeded the voltage of a high-power line. Chief designer Joseph Kotin and bureau head Fyodor Petrov faced a dilemma upon which the fate of the entire project depended, and thus the lives of thousands of tankers. The choice was brutal: elegance versus brute force. On one side of the scale lay the D-10 gun, caliber 100 millimeters. It was a sniper's instrument, light, with a high rate of fire, using the unitary cartridge that the loader could throw into the breech in one motion. It pierced the armor of the Tiger, but only the armor. On the other side lay howitzer power, 122 millimeters. The adapted A-19 core gun, designated D-25T. This was a monster. A shell weighing 25 kilograms. Separate loading ammunition. First, you have to ram the heavy projectile into the barrel, then the casing with the charge. This killed the rate of fire. 2, maximum 3 shots per minute against 6 for the 100. There was shouting in Petrov's office. Engineers, forgetting subordination, grabbed each other by the lapels of their jackets. "You are madmen!" screamed the lead ballistics specialist, jabbing a finger at the cross-section of the IS turret. "Look at the breach! It eats up half the fighting compartment. The loader won't just be unable to lift the shell, he won't have room to breathe." And the recoil? 20 tons of recoil force. The turret will simply jam, or it will be ripped off the ring to hell after the first volley. Petrov stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered factory yard. He knew these numbers by heart. He knew that by all canons of tank building, the 122 caliber was excessive. But he remembered something else. "And what if we don't penetrate?" Petrov asked quietly, not turning around. The noise in the office died down. 100 millimeters is a hole punch, he continued, turning to the arguers. His face was gray with fatigue, but his voice sounded firm, like the clack of a bolt carrier. We will pierce the armor, yes. But what if the shell passes right through without hitting the ammo rack or the crew? The German turns around and burns us. We don't need just the penetration. We need a knockout. He walked to the table and placed his palm on the drawing of the 122mm gun. 25 kilograms of steel and explosives. The kinetic energy is such that even with a ricochet, the German tank's welds burst and the transmission crumbles into dust. The crew suffers a concussion incompatible with continuing the fight. We aren't going to fence with them, comrades. We are going to hit them with a sledgehammer. It was a risk. A massive engineering and political risk. The standard military officials from the GAU, the main artillery directorate, were categorically against it. They demanded the 100. They wrote reports stating that the low rate of fire of the D-25T would make the new tank defenseless in a maneuverable battle. While ours is loading, the German will fire 3 times. This argument seemed fatal. Petrov understood. If he went the official route, coordinating every step, the project would drown in bureaucracy, and the front would not wait. Tanks were needed now. And then he went all in. Bypassing immediate superiors, bypassing the People's Commissariat, Petrov wrote a letter directly to the State Defense Committee, personally to Stalin. It was the act of a man betting his head. In 1937, one was shot for such arbitrariness. In 1943, one could be sent to a penal battalion, or be made a hero of socialist labor. There was no third option. The letter contained no emotions, only dry physics and tactics. Petrov argued, against the new German menagerie, a universal caliber was needed. 122mm meant not only fighting tanks, it meant destroying bunkers, pillboxes, brick buildings. It was a breakthrough assault weapon. The high-explosive shell of the D-25T demolished a 2-story house. The shell of the 100 only punched neat holes in it. "Send it?" the secretary asked, holding the sheet with trembling fingers. "Send it," Petrov nodded. Days of waiting stretched like rubber. Work in the design bureau did not stop for a minute, but every telephone ring made people flinch. What was it? Approval? Or an order for arrest, for sabotage, and missing deadlines? The answer came in the form of a short signature on the document, a sweeping scrawl in blue pencil. Agreed. I, Stalin. This word launched a mechanism that was no longer possible to stop. The Bureau switched to a 24-hour schedule. They slept right in the workshops, on equipment crates, covering themselves with oil-stained quilted jackets. The main problem was recoil. The gun was too powerful for a tank weighing 46 tons. Upon firing, it strove to roll back with such force that it could kill the commander sitting behind it. This energy had to be dampened. Muzzle brake, Kotin cut in at the next meeting. The military will be against it, the lead engineer objected. When firing, gases venting to the sides kick up a cloud of dust. The tank unmasks itself. It is blinded for several seconds. To hell with the dust, Kotin barked, slamming his fist on the table. Without a muzzle brake, this gun will rip out the front armor plate. We are installing a T-shaped brake. Let it unmask. After a hit, our tank won't have anyone to hide from anyway. The engineers worked at the limit of human capability. The breach had to be reconfigured, its dimensions reduced to leave at least some living space for the crew. The shutter was redesigned to a semi-automatic wedge type to speed up reloading. But physics cannot be cheated. The shell still weighed 25 kilograms. Try lugging these ingots around in a cramped bathhouse, the designers joked grimly, fitting wooden mock-ups of shells inside a plywood turret model. The loader in the IS-2 had to be more than just strong. He had to be an acrobat weightlifter in a cramped, gas-filled space, with the tank pitching as it moved. He had to grab the shell, ram it into the barrel, then grab the casing with the charge, ram it, and close the breech. And all of this in 20 to 30 seconds. "The standard is 2 shots per minute," Petrov dictated the test conditions. "If it's less, they will eat us alive." In the workshops of the pilot plant, they had already started cutting metal. Thick, hot shavings curled from under the cutters. Lathe operators, many of whom were teenagers, placed crates under their feet to reach the controls. They were turning parts for a mechanism that was on the verge of a technical foul. The German-type muzzle brake, an active one, was initially rejected. Upon firing, such a wave of gas blasted backward that it could concuss infantry walking behind the tank, or even their own driver if he stuck his head out of the hatch. The design had to be urgently redone. They developed a new 2-chamber brake, which became the calling card of the IS-2, a distinctive, recognizable profile that would later be called the Snakehead. By December 1943, the first prototype with the D-25 T-gun was ready. It stood in the workshop, smelling of fresh 4BO paint, oil, and scale. The long barrel with the massive knob of the muzzle brake hung over the lower armor plate, extending far beyond the hull's dimensions. It seemed the tank was about to tip onto its nose from such weight. Petrov approached the machine. He ran his hand over the cold metal of the barrel. This was no longer a drawing. It was an argument. The weightiest argument the Soviet Union could present to the Third Reich. "Well, Fyodor Fyodorovich," Kotin approached, lighting a cigarette. "Will it hold?" "The metal will hold," Petrov answered, looking at the powerful breech of the gun. "The main thing is that the people hold." Ahead was the proving ground, and the first real shot, which would either confirm the genius of the solution or put a cross on the designers' careers. But there was no way back. The blueprints had turned into armored reality, and this reality demanded combat verification. However, before the tank could get to the front, it had to be created in metal, not as a single unit, but in the thousands. And this task fell on the shoulders of those who had never held a rifle in their hands. The battle of engineers was over. The battle of factories was beginning. Ink on drawing paper cools quickly. Steel in the foundry takes hours to cool, and this process could not be stopped, day or night. Chelyabinsk, Tankograd, a geographic point on the map that in 1943 ceased to be just a city and turned into a single, clanging, smoking organism, 2,000 kilometers from the front line. Shells do not explode here, but a battle is waged where losses are written off not to combat operations, but to industrial accidents and exhaustion. The winter of 1943 to 44 is brutal. The thermometer drops to -40. In the huge, hastily erected workshops of the Chelyabinsk tractor plant, the wind howls. There are roofs only in some places. Snow falls directly onto the beds of lathes, hissing as it evaporates on hot shavings and immediately freezing into an icy crust on the floor. There is no heating. It is warm only where metal is poured or where welding is in progress. In the other bays, the temperature is the same as outside. People work in padded jackets, ushankas, wrapped in rags. Touching the frozen metal with a bare hand means an instant burn. Skin stays on the steel. There are no men of draft age at the machines. They are all out there, in the west, burning in old T-34s. Here, in the rear, armor is forged by those the war considered a weak resource. Women, old men, teenagers, children of 12 or 14 years old. Along the endless assembly lines stand wooden ammunition crates. These are not containers. They are platforms. Without them, the boy milling machine operator simply cannot reach the control handles of the machine. He has been standing on a shaky crate for the 12th hour straight. His shift is not 8 hours according to the laws of peacetime. His shift lasts as long as it takes to meet the quota. 14 hours. 16. Sometimes people do not leave the workshop for days, collapsing to sleep right there by a warm pile of shavings, only to stand at the machine again 3 hours later. "Where is the relief?" The foreman's hoarse voice breaks through the roar of the transmission. "Won't be coming," answers a woman in an oil-stained headscarf, not taking her eyes off the rotating part. Typhus. That means you stand 2 shifts. The quota for the hull is 30 units. If you don't make it, the rations will be cut for the whole brigade. She does not argue. She simply nods and changes the cutter. In this world, there is no room for pity. There is only the plan and the frontline report. Production of the IS-2 is a technological hell. The tank hull is a cast part of immense complexity. The nose of the machine, that straightened frontal part which would later be called the humped nose or straightened nose, depending on the modification, requires the highest quality of casting. The slightest pore, cavity, or air bubble in the thickness of the metal, and the armor will split from a blow like glass. Defects are unacceptable. A defect means the death of a crew in a month and an execution article for the technologists today. In the foundry, the hellish flame of open hearth furnaces illuminates haggard faces. Liquid steel flows down chutes, scattering sheaves of sparks. The heat here is such that it takes your breath away, but step 10 meters away, and the cold chills to the bone. This temperature contrast wears out the human body faster than working to exhaustion. Hearts fail. People fall. They are dragged aside, given a sip of boiling water, and if the person is alive, they return to the line. Hull assembly, welding stations. Flashes of electric welding snatch figures of workers from the gloom. They look like ghosts in their canvas robes. Electrodes melt, stitching together armor plates 120 and 90 millimeters thick. The seam must be monolithic. The strength of the seam is checked rigorously. "Weld deeper!" the technologist shouts through his mask. "You're pushing slag! This isn't a cooking pot, it's a turret! A solid shot will hit there. If the seam bursts, heads will fly." Sparks shower onto felt boots, burning through clothes. No one pays attention. The smell of singed cotton and burnt flesh is the familiar smell of the workshop. Logistics inside the plant is a separate battle. The IS-2 turret is cramped but heavy. Installing the D-25T gun requires jeweler-like precision. The huge cannon with its massive breech must enter the embrasure with gaps of millimeters. The crane operator under the ceiling, a girl of about 18, controls the multi-ton load. One wrong movement of the lever, and the gun will crush the assemblers. "Up! Down a little!" The commands sound abrupt. The barrel with the muzzle brake slowly lowers onto the trunnions. A heavy metallic clang. The gun is seated. Fitters immediately rush to secure the aiming mechanisms and recoil devices. Hands in oil, fingers skinned to blood, but movements are fast, practiced to automatism. The tank is assembled like a construction set, but the parts of this set weigh hundreds of kilograms. The transmission, the V2IS engine with 520 horsepower. The diesel roars on the break-in stand, filling the workshop with blue smoke. Ventilation cannot cope. People breathe a mixture of carbon monoxide and oil mist. Eyes water. There is a constant metallic taste in the mouth. But the conveyor crawls. Every 24 hours, new machines roll out of the factory gates. They are not painted in parade gloss yet. They are rough. Traces of casting molds are visible on the armor. Weld seams are coarse like scars. But these are not museum exhibits. These are instruments of murder. The workday ends only when the foreman puts a check mark in the ledger. "Ivanova, go home," he commands. "I'll finish the batch," answers the girl, barely standing on her legs. "My brother is near Vitebsk. He needs it." This is not patriotism from a poster. This is everyone's personal war. They know, if they stop here, the tanks will stop there, at the front. And then the cold that reigns in the workshop will come into their homes forever. The finished IS-2 rolls out into the factory yard. Tracks crunch on snow mixed with metal shavings and slag. The machine looks ominous in the winter twilight. Long barrel, powerful turret, low silhouette. It was created by the hands of hungry children and tired women, but there is nothing childish or feminine in it. It is a concentrate of rage and heavy industry. The metal was ready. It had passed the fire of furnaces, the cold of rolling, and the precision of the milling cutter. But were the people ready for what lay ahead? The machine froze at the gates, puffing exhaust steam into the frosty air. Ahead waited the proving ground, the place where the theory of designers and the labor of workers were to meet the harsh practice of destruction. The first exam passed. The tank is born. Now it must be taught to kill. December 1943. Kubinka Proving Ground. The ground here is frozen a meter deep, becoming hard as concrete. The air rings with frost. On the snow-covered field, opposite the grandstand with the State Commission, stands a German heavy tank, a Tiger. It is a trophy captured near Leningrad. Its armor is intact, mechanisms operational. It stands as a standard of protection, as a symbol that German equipment is invulnerable to Soviet artillery at long ranges. At the firing line, 1.5 kilometers from the target, the new tank freezes. Its silhouette is squat, and the barrel is unnaturally long for such a machine. At the end of the barrel is a massive muzzle brake, looking like the flared hood of a cobra. This is the IS-2, Object 240. Inside the turret, it is cramped. The loader, bent double, grabs a blunt-nosed armor-piercing shell, the BR-471, from the rack. 25 kilograms of cold steel. Muscles of the back strain, veins on the neck bulge. A heave. The shell enters the breech with a dull metallic thud. Following it flies the casing with the propellant charge. "Ready," he exhales, jumping aside from the recoil line. The commander presses against the sight eyepiece. The crosshairs catch the gray turret of the Tiger. "Fire!" The shot of the 122mm D-25T gun is not like the shot of a T-34. It is not a pop. It is a tectonic shift. 2 giant tongues of flame burst from the muzzle brake, spreading to the sides. The snow in front of the tank flies upward, exposing black earth. The shockwave hits the ears of the observers on the grandstand, making them instinctively duck. 46 tons of fighting machine rock backward. Shock absorbers groan, taking on the monstrous recoil energy. A moment later, a ball of fire erupts on the armor of the German tank. The sound of the impact arrives with a delay, a heavy, grinding rumble, as if a steel cable the thickness of an arm had snapped. The commission hurries to the target. Snow crunches under the general's boots. What they see makes them fall silent. It is not a penetration. It is an execution. The shell struck the frontal plate of the turret. The armor, 100 millimeters thick, of which the Reich's engineers were so proud, is not just pierced, it is shattered. A huge chunk of steel is torn out with the meat and driven inward. The weld seams connecting the hull sheets have burst from the monstrous vibration. The Tiger's turret, weighing over 10 tons, has been sheared off the ring and shifted 0.5 meter to the side. Inside the German tank is chaos. The breech of the gun is flattened, mechanisms mixed into a steel porridge. "Distance?" the chairman of the commission asks dryly. 1,500 meters, Comrade Colonel General, reports the head of the proving ground. The generals exchange glances. 1.5 kilometers. This is a distance of absolute superiority. Before, at such a range, our tanks were merely targets. Now the enemy has become the target. "Reduce the distance," follows the order. 500 meters. The tank closes in. A new shot. The result shocks even experienced artillerymen. The heavy shell punches through the Tiger entirely. It enters the front, passes through the entire fighting compartment, crushing everything in its path, pierces the engine bulkhead, the engine, the rear plate, and flies off into the forest. "A beast," someone from the entourage says. "A true beast slayer." But the tests are not finished. The army demands versatility. The tank must not only fight its own kind, but also crack defenses. A mock-up of a bunker is built on the proving ground. A reinforced concrete box, an embrasure, wall thickness, 0.5 meter. A standard firing point that can stop an infantry battalion for 24 hours. The IS-2 is loaded with a high-explosive fragmentation shell, the OF-471. The same weight, 25 kilograms, but inside is nearly 4 kilograms of TNT. Shot. A mushroom of dust, concrete and smoke grows on the spot of the bunker. When the wind blows away the curtain, the commission sees a level platform. The bunker is gone. There is a pile of rubble and protruding rebar. The concrete could not withstand the explosive action. The energy of the blast turned the monolith into dust. "If a shell hits a house?" asks one of the officers. "There won't be a house," designer Petrov answers grimly. "It will fold like a house of cards." The dialogues of the commission members become short, chopped. Skepticism about separate loading has disappeared. Arguments about the rate of fire have vanished. Everyone understands. When you have a sledgehammer in your hands, you don't need to fence. You need to hit once. "Ammunition load," clarifies the GAU representative. 28 rounds, answers Kotin. Too few. Enough to destroy 28 targets, the designer parries. Or do you plan on missing? In this question sounds the new philosophy of Soviet tank building. The quality of the shot is more important than the quantity. Accuracy and power are more important than the density of fire. The Act of State Trials is signed right on the hood of a Willys Jeep. The tank is accepted into service immediately. It is assigned the index IS-2. Joseph Stalin. This name is not just a tribute to the leader. It is a seal of the highest responsibility. A tank bearing such a name has no right to be mediocre. It has no right to break down. It has no right to retreat. Every defect, every breakdown will now be viewed not as a technical hitch, but as a political crime. For the designers, this is a triumph mixed with chilling fear. They created a monster. But now this monster must prove its right to life in real combat. Proving ground truth is sterile conditions. There is no mud, no crew fatigue, no panic, and no return fire. The shooting ends at twilight. The IS-2 stands against the backdrop of the sunset sky, cooling down. Light steam rises from the barrel. The metal smells of gunpowder fumes and heated oil. The earth around is churned up by tracks and craters. Physics has proven its superiority. Kinetic energy, multiplied by caliber, became the argument that is impossible to ignore. At the same time, calm still reigns in German headquarters. They believe in their armor penetration tables. They believe that 88 millimeters is the pinnacle of artillery thought. They do not yet know that a predator has been born in the East, for whom their armor is not an obstacle, but merely a temporary delay in the shell's flight. Soviet tankers receive the new machine. They stroke the rough armor of the turret, look at the huge muzzle brake, and for the first time in a long while feel not doom, but cold, angry confidence. The balance of power has shifted, and it shifted with the roar of a 122mm shot. The machine is ready for the hunt. The time of victims has passed. The time of executioners is arriving. February 1944, Right Bank, Ukraine. The thaw. Mud in which boots, wheels, and hopes get stuck. Inside a German Tiger, camouflaged at the edge of a forest, it smells of synthetic oil, sweat, and ersatz coffee. The crew is calm. This is the calm of professionals accustomed to impunity. They are the top of the food chain. Over the last 6 months, they have burned 36 Russian tanks without receiving a single scratch. Gunner Hans is glued to the Zeiss sight eyepiece. The optics are magnificent. They brighten the overcast day, making the picture sharp and high contrast. In the crosshairs is the silhouette of a Soviet tank. Hans frowns. This is not a T-34. The silhouette is lower, wider. The turret is not angular and welded, but streamlined, cast, looking like an overturned pot. And that strange, unnaturally long barrel with a knob. Ivan's new toy, he mutters. Distance, 1,800 meters. The tank commander, an Oberleutnant, doesn't even look through the periscope. He trusts the gunner. 1,800 meters is a shooting gallery. Russian guns are useless at this distance. Their shells simply don't reach or fall, having lost all energy. Armor piercing. Fire, he commands in a bored voice. The familiar jolt. The casing falls into the basket with a ring. The crew waits for the familiar result, a flash of fire on the horizon and black smoke. In the sight, Hans sees the tracer draw a straight line and strike exactly the front of the Russian machine. Sparks, and that's all. The tank continues to crawl. The shell, capable of punching through any Allied tank, bounced off the cast armor of the IS-2 like a pea off a wall. The ricochet went into the sky, leaving only a light spot on the armor. I don't understand, the gunner's voice loses confidence. Hit! No effect! Repeat! The commander's voice becomes sharper. Hit the turret! Under the rim! Second shot. Impact again. Sparks again. The Russian machine didn't even slow down. It simply turns its turret. Slowly. Menacingly. At this moment, a psychological breakdown occurs in the German tank. What had been an axiom for years, we are invulnerable at a distance, crumbles into dust. A safe distance no longer exists. Hans sees the black pupil of the Soviet gun's muzzle brake looking straight into his soul. This muzzle brake is huge. It does not look like neat German designs. It is a crude, functional instrument of death. He sees us! The gunner screams. Load! Faster! But the physics of time works against them. While the German loader reaches for a new shell, a 122mm argument is already locked in the breech of the IS-2. The flash on the other side of the field seems small, but a second later the world ceases to exist for the German crew. Impact. It is not just a sound, it is a pressure drop that bursts eardrums. The IS-2 shell, not even armor-piercing but high explosive, strikes the joint of the turret and hull of the Tiger. The explosion of 25 kilograms of steel and TNT rips equipment from its mountings inside. Optics shatter into fine crumbs right into the gunner's face. The transmission cracks. The multi-ton turret of the Tiger jumps up, tearing off the ring, and jams tight. There is no fire inside the tank, but the crew is incapacitated. Concussion. Blood flows from ears and noses. The driver is unconscious, his head smashed against observation instruments. The commander tries to say something, but doesn't hear his own voice. The smell of ozone and red-hot scale stands in the cabin. "Out! Out!" The commander kicks the survivors out. They tumble out of the hatches into the mud, coughing and staggering. They run without looking back. Behind them stands their Tiger, the pride of the Wehrmacht, turned into a pile of scrap metal by a single hit. Rumors spread along the front faster than orders from Berlin. Stalin's monster. Russian hammer. Wehrmacht infantry, citing the characteristic silhouette with the snake head at the end of the barrel, abandon positions. Tankers of Panthers and Tigers, the army elite, begin to avoid direct duels. Panic sounds in the radio traffic of German tank divisions. "Attention all! Grid 7-2! Enemy heavy tanks, type IS! Engage? Negative. Withdraw. Wait for aviation. Do not close in." German command issues urgent instructions. In them, dry, bureaucratic language barely hides bewilderment. It is forbidden to engage in open combat with IS-2 tanks without a numerical superiority of 3-1. It is recommended to fire only from ambush and only at the side. But war is not chess, where one can choose a convenient position. The IS-2 does not look for duels. It breaks through defenses. It imposes its own rules. The psychology of the German tanker changes irreversibly. Before, he was a hunter choosing a victim. Now, he is the game. He peers into every bush, every fold of the terrain, expecting to see that long barrel. Fear becomes a constant companion. It is not the fear of death. One gets used to that in war. It is the fear of impotence. The understanding that your gun does not penetrate, while their gun destroys you with any hit, breaks the will. March 1944, near Kamenets-Podolsky. A group of IS-2s moves to intercept a retreating German column. The Germans see the tanks. The first reaction before would have been deployment into battle formation. Now the reaction is singular. Gas pedal to the floor. Heavy Tigers try to escape, wrecking engines. They abandon infantry, abandon artillery, anything to get out of the kill zone of the 122mm caliber. One of the German mechanics, captured later, would say a phrase at interrogation that would become a diagnosis for the entire Panzerwaffe. When you see a T-34, you think about how to knock it out. When you see an IS-2, you think about how to survive. We knew that if that tank fired, neither armor nor God would save us. A new law reigned on the battlefield. The law of kinetic energy, before which German steel proved powerless. The era of unpunished shootings ended. The era of fear began. And this fear drove the enemy west, breaking the spine of the most disciplined army in the world. Drove them until they ran up against the Vistula, where German engineers, in a last desperate attempt to regain superiority, were preparing their final trump card for battle, the King Tigers. But the crews of the IS-2 had already tasted blood. They knew. There is no armor that a Russian shell won't smash through if people who went through the hell of 1941 are sitting at the levers. August 1944, Poland. The Sandomierz bridgehead. The air here is dense, hot, choked with dust. Dust is everywhere, on armor, on tankers' faces, in bolt mechanisms. The sun hangs at its zenith, heating steel to a temperature where touching the hull leaves a burn. But the hatches are closed. Crews of heavy IS-2 tanks sit in their machines, which have turned into gas chambers. They are waiting. The earth begins to tremble. It is not the familiar vibration of an artillery barrage. It is a low, rhythmic rumble coming from deep within the ground. It grows, making small stones jump on the armor. The Germans are playing their last trump card. Out from behind the hills, hidden by the haze of the hot day, monsters crawl out. This is the debut of the Tiger B, better known as the King Tiger, the pinnacle of Third Reich technical thought. 68 tons of alloy steel, frontal armor, 150 millimeters at a rational slope angle, gun, 88 millimeters, 71 calibers in length. This weapon is capable of hitting any target at a distance of 2.5 kilometers. The German machines move confidently. They do not hide. They move in a dense formation, kicking up clouds of sand. Panzerwaffe commanders are convinced the Russians have nothing that could stop this steel avalanche. They believe the era of their dominance has returned. In the periscope of the Soviet Heavy Guards Regiment commander, the German giant grows with every second. The massive turret, the long barrel with the muzzle brake, the wide tracks grinding the Polish earth are visible. "Fat ones," the commander wheezes into his throat microphone. His voice is dull, distorted by static. "Walking like on parade." "Distance 1,200, the gunner responds. His hands on the hand wheels are motionless. He does not tremble. He calculates the lead. "Wait," orders the commander. "Let them get closer. Hit for sure." Ambush tactics are a test of nerves. Shoot early, the shell will ricochet off the sloped frontal plate, and you reveal yourself. Shoot late, the German 88 will turn your tank into a blazing torch before you press the trigger. You have to catch that single moment when the enemy exposes a flank or comes within point-blank range. The village of Oguldo. IS-2 tanks are camouflaged in haystacks, in the ruins of barns, in the folds of the terrain. They have merged with the landscape. Engines are killed so as not to unmask the position with blue exhaust. Silence in the airwaves is absolute. The German column is drawn into the fire sack. The lead, King Tiger, turns its turret, scanning the horizon. It searches for targets far away, not noticing death at its side. 700 meters, whispers the gunner. Turret side. See it clearly. Fire! The command hits the ears sharper than a shot. The tank shudders. The muzzle brake ejects flame, blowing away the camouflage. Hay and branches fly in a whirlwind. A shell with a mass of 25 kilograms covers 700 meters in a fraction of a second. Impact. This time, physics gives the Germans no chance. The BR-471 armor-piercing shell strikes the side of the King Tiger's turret. The armor there is thick, but the kinetic energy of the Soviet caliber is transcendent. The shell smashes through the steel. Inside the German tank, in the rear niche of the turret, lies the ammo rack. Red-hot shards of armor and remnants of the shell fly straight into the casings with gunpowder. Detonation. An explosion of such force that the 70-ton turret of the German giant is ripped off the ring and tossed into the air. It falls next to the hull, upside down, smoking, looking like the skull of a killed beast. A pillar of fire rises dozens of meters. "Done!" screams the loader, already ramming the next shell. "Take that, bastard!" The enemy column falls into a stupor. They do not see the enemy. They only see how their invulnerable leader turned into a pile of scrap metal in 1 second. Panic is a tanker's worst enemy. German drivers start jerking levers, trying to turn the heavy, clumsy machines. Tanks collide, blocking each other's sectors of fire. "Second one, get the track!" commands the platoon leader. "Stop him!" The second IS-2 shot shatters the drive sprocket of the next Tiger. The track flies off, snaking along the ground. The tank spins from inertia, exposing its vulnerable side to the blow. The next shell, high explosive, strikes the hull joint. It doesn't penetrate the armor, but the blast wave breaks the transmission and concusses the crew. Hatches open. Men in black uniforms tumble out, crawling on the ground, trying to get away from the fire. This is not a battle. This is a beating. Chaos of German commands and clear, angry orders of Soviet commanders fill the airwaves. "Third one, on the right! Finish him! Hit! Burning!" In a few minutes, the elite heavy tank battalion ceases to exist as a combat unit. Smoke from burning King Tigers obscures the sun. The smell of burning rubber tires, melting metal, and burnt human flesh covers the battlefield. IS-2 crews work like automatons. The loader, wet with sweat, with a wrenched back, throws 25-kilogram slugs. Rate of fire, 1.5 to 2 shots per minute. Slow? No. Every hit is a destroyed target. Here, you don't need to bury the enemy in a hail of shells. Here, the principle works. One shot, one death. When the smoke clears a little, a graveyard of German ambitions remains on the field. 3 brand-new King Tigers are destroyed and captured. The rest crawl away, snapping back with useless fire. The commander's cupola hatch flips open. Hot air hits the face, but it seems cool after the hell of the fighting compartment. The commander climbs out onto the armor, wiping his face with an oily rag. He looks at his handiwork. Nearby, about 100 meters away, stands a knocked-out King Tiger. Its armor has cracked. A huge crack snakes along the entire side of the turret. The metal could not withstand the internal stress. And they said it was impenetrable. The driver spits, climbing out after him. Iron is iron. It's brittle, remarks the commander, lighting a cigarette. His hands tremble, but not from fear, but from the come-down after the adrenaline storm. They over-hardened the steel. The Krauts are rushing. The quality isn't what it used to be. They approach the trophy. The huge carcass of the fallen beast commands respect, but not fear. The fear is gone. What remains is the heavy work of disposing of fascism. The commander runs his hand over the hole. The edges are melted. Went in well, he nods. Clean through. This battle near Oguldo put an end to the designer's dispute. The German bet on super-heavy tanks, on increasing armor and weight, turned out to be a dead end. The Soviet IS-2, being lighter than the King Tiger by 20-odd tons, proved more effective. It was more mobile, reliable, and its gun delivered a final diagnosis to any German cat. In the evening, when the battle finally died down, the tankers sat on the armor, eating dry rations. Their gazes were empty. No one discussed tactics. No one bragged. Just another day of war. Another step to the west. Need to replenish shells, the loader said quietly, massaging his shoulder. They'll climb out again tomorrow. They will, agreed the commander, and we'll meet them. From the Sandomierz bridgehead, a straight road opened up. The road to the beast's lair. And now the Red Army had the key to the gates of this lair, a 122mm key that didn't ask permission to enter, but simply kicked the door in along with the jam. Autumn, 1944. The spacious fields of Poland are replaced by the stone traps of European cities. Debrecen, Budapest, Poznan. Here, war changes its geometry. The horizon narrows to the width of a street. Combat ranges, which used to be measured in kilometers, now shrink to the throw of a grenade. The IS-2 tank, created for dominance in open spaces, finds itself in a labyrinth where every basement and every attic breathes death. In the city, the long barrel of the 122mm gun becomes a problem. To turn the turret on a narrow street, the driver has to work the levers with jeweler precision, turning the entire hull. One clumsy movement, and the muzzle brake slams into the wall of a house, getting clogged with brick dust and plaster. And there is no time for maneuvers. Urban combat is hell for armored vehicles. There is no front line here. The enemy is everywhere, above, below, behind. The crew's main nightmare is not tigers hiding in alleyways. The main nightmare is the Faustnik, a lone infantryman with a disposable Panzerfaust grenade launcher. A tube filled with a shaped charge is capable of burning through the armor of an IS-2 from 30 meters. A jet of molten metal bursts inside the fighting compartment, igniting fuel tanks and ammunition. The crew burns alive without even realizing where the blow came from. Tankers hate cities. They feel like beasts trapped in a cage. But infantry cannot move forward without armor. Machine gun nests in stone buildings turn streets into corridors of death. And then the IS-2 comes to the front. Now it is not a tank hunter. Now it is an assault gun, a battering ram. A street in a Hungarian city. The cobblestones are slippery from autumn rain and oil. A group of submachine gunners huddles against walls, hiding behind facade protrusions. Ahead, in a second-floor window of a corner building, a German MG-42 machine gun is working. It cuts off any attempts to advance. Brick walls reliably protect the machine gunner from bullets. "Bring up the heavy!" screams the assault group commander, pressing the handset of a field telephone connected to the back of the tank to his ear. "Reference point 2! Corner house, second floor! Crush them!" The IS-2 engine roars, spewing a cloud of blue smoke. The tank crawls out from cover just enough for the barrel to acquire the target. The turret turns slowly. Inside the tank, it is cramped and stuffy. The loader has already rammed a high-explosive fragmentation shell, the OF-471, into the breech. This is 25 kilograms of argument against architecture. The fuse is set to high-explosive action, with a delay. This means the shell will not explode upon impact with the wall. It will punch through the masonry, fly inside the room, and only there, in the enclosed space, will detonation occur. "High explosive! Into the window!" commands the tank commander. The gunner catches the dark opening of the window from where the machine gun burst is beating in the crosshairs. Bullets click on the frontal armor, chipping paint, but for the IS-2, this is no more than hail on a roof. Shot. In the narrow stone well of the street, the sound of the 122mm gunshot is amplified many times over. It is a physical blow to the eardrums. Windows in neighboring houses fly out along with the frames. Plaster showers from facades like snow. The shell enters exactly into the window. A second's pause. And then the corner part of the building simply ceases to exist. The explosion from within bulges the walls, tears apart the floors. The roof settles, raising a pillar of dust the height of a 3-story house. The machine gun falls silent forever, along with the gunner and the entire crew. "Clear!" wheezes the commander into the throat mic. "Infantry, go!" Submachine gunners break from their spots, running over piles of broken brick while the dust still hangs in the air, hiding them from the enemy's eyes. The tank covers them, the DT machine gun barking in short bursts, suppressing any signs of life in the ruins. Tactics change. Now tanks and infantry are a single organism. The tank is the skeleton and muscles. The infantry are the eyes and ears. Paratroopers ride right on the armor, jumping off at the first sign of danger. They clean floors, smoke out Faustniks from basements, indicate targets with tracer bullets. "Right, attic!" a paratrooper yells, banging his rifle butt on the armor. The IS-2 turret traverses. Shot. The attic is gone. There is only a hole in the sky and burning beams flying down. But the city takes its toll. Visibility from the tank is terrible. Vision slits get clogged with dust and mud. The commander often has to stick out of the hatch, risking a sniper bullet, to at least somehow assess the situation. "Back! Back it up!" he commands the mechanic. "Around the corner!" The tank backs up, clanking tracks on broken brick. The screech of metal on stone is such that it sets teeth on edge. The IS-2 works like a giant hammer, paving a road through urban development. Where there is no passage, it makes one itself. 46 tons of weight and the power of the diesel allow it to go through fences, barricades, and even through the walls of small houses. Inside the fighting compartment, the crew works in respirators or wet rags on their faces. Ventilation cannot cope with gunpowder gases. After a dozen shots in the enclosed space of a street, the concentration of carbon monoxide becomes critical. The head spins, movements become sluggish. The loader, having thrown half a ton of iron during the battle, barely stands on his legs. His hands tremble, his back burns with fire. "Water," he whispers, licking dry lips covered with a black crust of soot. "No water. Endure," answers the commander, not tearing himself away from the sight. "2 more blocks." Urban combat is work to exhaustion. It is constant tension. You cannot relax for a second. From any sewer grate, from any basement window, death can fly out. Tankers drape the sides with bed springs, sandbags, weld on extra sheets of iron, anything to disrupt the cumulative jet of a Panzerfaust, to force it to trigger prematurely. Dialogues in the airwaves become extremely short, functional. No extra words, only coordinates, target types, and confirmation of destruction. Reference point 5, brickwork, pillbox. Copy, high explosive. Shot, target covered. Sometimes they have to shoot armor-piercing rounds, not at tanks, at houses, when you need to stitch a building through to get an enemy hiding behind 2 or 3 walls. The shell punches through partitions like cardboard, bringing structures down on the heads of the defenders. By the end of 1944, IS-2 crews become masters of street fighting. They learn to feel the dimensions of the machine down to the millimeter, learn to read architecture, understanding where the enemy might be sitting. They know that a half-meter brick wall is not cover from a 122mm shell. It is simply additional shrapnel made of stone. In these stone sacks, a special brotherhood is born. A brotherhood of dusty, deafened men who are used to sleeping to the roar of cannonade and eating porridge with the taste of lime. They know. Their job is the dirtiest and the hardest. They are the battering ram that breaks the back of the German defense, turning fortress cities into piles of rubble. And ahead, beyond the smoke of burning European capitals, the main goal is already emerging. The Beast's Lair. A city that promised to stand for 1,000 years, but which has weeks left to live. Berlin. There, in the labyrinth of imperial streets, the IS-2 is to pass its main exam, an exam for survival in the very center of the agonizing Reich. There, where the density of fire exceeds all conceivable limits and the fanaticism of the enemy borders on madness. The metal hums, cooling after the battle. The crew smokes, sitting on the armor, looking at the smoking ruins. "They built strong houses," remarks the gunner, wiping soot from his face. "Breaking isn't building," answers the commander, flicking a cigarette butt into the mud. "Start her up. We still have to get to the square." The engine sneezes and begins its rhythmic song again. Tracks bite into the cobblestones. The steel battering ram continues its journey to the west. April 1945. Berlin. The sun is gone here. The sky is covered with a greasy black veil from burning oil depots, asphalt, and thousands of buildings. At noon, Twilight stands on the streets. The air is thick like jelly. It scratches the lungs with a mixture of brick dust, burning, and the sickly sweet smell of decay. This is not just a city. It is an agonizing organism that has decided to drag as many living things as possible into the grave with it. Along a street cluttered with the debris of imperial grandeur, an IS-2 crawls. The hull number is rubbed out by mud and soot, but the crew knows their machine by touch. Commander Guard Senior Lieutenant Vasily Udalov looks through the periscope. His eyes are inflamed from insomnia. They haven't slept for 3 days. A constant ringing stands in his ears, a cocktail of diesel roar, artillery cannonade, and his own pulse. Berlin is turned into a layer cake of defense. Barricades block every intersection. These are not piles of trash, but engineering structures. Tram cars dug into the ground and filled with concrete. Steel beams, sandbags in 5 rows. "Obstacle ahead," the driver's voice in the headset sounds muffled, like from underground. "Movement in the house on the right." The IS-2 stops. The engine goes to idle, rumbling low. The tank breathes heat. The cooling system is working at the limit, radiators clogged with dust. Inside the fighting compartment, the temperature is near 40 degrees. The loader sits on the floor, leaning his back against the shell catcher. His tunic is black with sweat and oil, hands shaking with a fine tremor. He just threw an empty casing into the hatch. It was the 20th for today. 500 kilograms of iron carried by hand in cramped conditions and fumes. "High explosive, at the barricade," commands Udalov. "Take apart that junk." The turret turns with the strained whine of the electric drive. The barrel with the muzzle brake looks at the pile of concrete and steel. Distance, 100 meters. Impossible to miss. Shot. In the narrow canyon of the street, it looks like the end of the world. The shock wave knocks plaster off facades for hundreds of meters around. The shell, weighing 25 kilograms, crashes into the base of the barricade. The explosion smashes the tram car into splinters. Concrete blocks fly apart like cubes. The passage is open. "Forward!" screams the commander. "Infantry, keep up! Driver, crush it!" 46 tons of armor tear off. Tracks crunch, grinding brick, glass, and the remains of the barricade. The tank goes straight through. It is not a guest here. It is the landlord who has come to evict the tenants. But Berlin snaps back. From a basement window, almost at ground level, a jet of fire erupts. Panzerfaust. The grenade flies in an arc, aiming for the side. Impact hits the mesh screen, welded in a makeshift way back on the approaches to the city. The shaped charge triggers prematurely, dissipating in the air without reaching the main armor. The tank jolted, but it is alive. "Left, basement!" yells Udalov. "Machine gun, suppress him!" The gunner presses the trigger of the coaxial machine gun. The DT spits a long burst, crumbling brick around the embrasure. Following it flies a grenade from an infantryman walking behind the armor. A pop. Silence. Advance to the city center goes by meters. Every house is a fortress. Every floor is a firing point. This is no longer a war of maneuvers, not tactics of encirclement. This is rough, heavy work of grinding stone and people. Vasily Udalov knows somewhere nearby is the Tiergarten, a park turned into a fortified area. The last tigers and panthers are buried there. They stand like pillboxes, without fuel, but with a full ammo load. The tank crawls out onto an intersection. Through the smoke, the outlines of the Moltke Bridge emerge. And immediately, a flash on the right. A solid shot strikes the frontal hull detail. The ringing is such that it seems the head has split in two. But the armor holds. Ricochet. The IS-2, created to take the blow of German 88s, justifies every ton of its weight. "Tank, right in the square!" The gunner's voice breaks into a squeal. Udalov sees it. A panther, dug in up to the turret. Only the predatory profile and the barrel are visible. "Armor-piercing!" screams the commander. The loader, overcoming the leaden heaviness in his muscles, tears the shell from the rack. BR-471, heavy, cold. He rams it into the barrel. The casing flies in after. The breech clangs, locking death inside. "Ready!" There is no time to aim. They shoot from the hip, by intuition, by the experience of thousands of kilometers traveled. The shot of the IS-2 and the shot of the Panther sound almost simultaneously. The German's shell grazes the gun mantlet, striking sparks, but goes to the side. The IS-2 shell finds the target. The 122mm slug strikes the turret of the German tank. Kinetic energy rips it off the ring, despite the fact that the hull is dug into the ground. The explosion of the ammo rack inside the Panther throws up a pillar of flame the height of a 5-story building. "Got him!" exhales Udalov. "Burning the bastard!" They advance further, past burning equipment, past corpses, past smashed trams. Fatigue piles on like a granite slab. One wants only one thing: to close eyes and go deaf, so that this endless crashing stops. But stopping is impossible. Stopping is death. Faustniks do not sleep. They wait for the tank to freeze, even for a minute. "Commander, diesel is running out," reports the mechanic. "Tanks are almost dry." "We'll make it," Udalov answers grimly. "We'll make it on fumes. There's nothing left to go." They come out to the Landwehr Canal. Ahead, through breaks in smoke and dust, a gray, massive building with a dome emerges. The Reichstag. It looks gloomy, pockmarked with hits, with black gaps of windows. But it is not just a building. It is the finish line ribbon. The end of the road started at the Volga. Chaos reigns in the airwaves. Hundreds of voices, shouts, commands, swearing. Everyone is rushing there. Everyone wants to put a period. "First, I am fifth. Visual on object," wheezes the radio. "Fire on lower floors.
Support assault groups."
The IS-2 turns with its whole hull. The barrel rises. "High explosive," commands Udalov. "At the columns." Shot. A huge column of the Reichstag, undercut by the shell, slowly settles, raising a cloud of dust. Infantry, small gray figures, rush to the steps. Inside the tank, a strange moment arrives. The crew works automatically, but one thought beats in their heads. Is it really over? They made it. They brought this 46-ton piece of Ural steel into the very heart of the enemy. Hands in oil, faces black with soot, eyes red. They do not feel like heroes. They feel like workers finishing the hardest shift in the history of mankind. The shell crate is empty. 2 shots left. "Save the last one," Udalov says quietly. "Just in case." Around thunders the hell of the last assault. Katyushas fire over open sights. Artillery plows up the Tiergarten. But in this roar, another note is already heard. A note of inevitability. The German garrison is doomed. The fear they sowed for years has returned to them 100-fold, multiplied by the caliber 122mm. Udalov flips the hatch. Air bursts into the turret, hot, stinking, but fresh compared to what is inside. He looks at the gray walls of the Reichstag. 300 meters to it. 300 meters of death and immortality. "Well, guys," he says into the intercom, and his voice for the first time in the day sounds not like an order, but like simple human speech. "We've arrived. Last stop. Everybody out." But they do not get out. They reload machine guns. The war is not over yet. It is simply cornered, and therefore even more dangerous. The beast in its lair will bite to the last cartridge, and the crew's task is to rip out these teeth, along with the jaw. The mechanic engages the gear. The tank jerks and crawls toward the steps that will soon enter history textbooks. The IS-2, covered in scars, in soot, with punctured screens, looks more majestic now than any monument. It is not a parade machine. It is a worker of war who has come for his wages, and these wages are victory. The silence that fell on May 2nd, 1945, was more terrifying than the roar. It was a cottony, dense silence in which the ringing in the ears seemed like a deafening alarm bell. The diesel is killed. Fans stopped. One can only hear the metal cooling, a quiet, rhythmic crackling of armor plates contracting after the hellish heat of battle. Inside the IS-2 turret, it does not smell of victory. It smells of stale sweat, bleach from decontamination kits, burnt insulation, and gunpowder fumes eaten into the paint. The loader sits on the floor of the fighting compartment, leaning his back against the gun breech. He is 20 years old, but looks 40. His face is gray, covered with a crust of soot, black circles under his eyes. He tries to unbend his back, and a grimace of pain distorts his face. His spine is a compressed spring. Over the last 2 weeks of the storming of Berlin, he threw tons of metal with his hands. Every shot is a cycle of heavy lifting in an enclosed space. A shell weighing 25 kilograms must be yanked from the rack, turned in the cramp without hitting the commander, and rammed into the barrel. Then grab the 15-kilogram casing, and like that, 28 times for one ammo load. And loading ammo through hatches under sniper fire? This is stevedore work in hell. Many loaders were diagnosed with chronic vertebral displacement, inguinal hernias, and micro tears of muscles by the end of the war. They came out of the tank as victors, but invalids. "Back?" the commander asks hoarsely, looking at his hunched comrade. "Can't feel it," answers the loader, spitting viscous black saliva. "Like it's made of wood." "It'll pass." I still have whistling in my ears, like a kettle boiling. The commander paid his price too. The 122mm D-25T gun is a weapon of colossal power, but physics cannot be cheated. The muzzle brake dampens part of the recoil, but the shock wave and pressure drop upon firing inside the tank are still palpable. After a series of shots, blood often flowed from ears and noses. Barotrauma was an occupational disease of IS crews. They went deaf. They received microconcussions without leaving the machine. Every destroyed German tank cost the crew a piece of their health. They climb out of the tank slowly, like old men. Legs are numb and trembling. The air of Berlin, soaked in the smoke of fires, seems like purest oxygen to them. Around, by the walls of the Reichstag and on the embankments of the Spree, stand other machines. Some of them will never move again. Statistics are a stubborn and cruel thing. During operation and combat actions, irrevocable losses of IS-2 tanks amounted to about 1,350 units. This is a dry figure in reports, but behind every unit are 4 people, 4 destinies. The armor of the IS-2 was powerful, but not absolute. German Panzerfausts in urban battles burned through sides, turning the fighting compartment into a furnace. If the ammo load detonated, there were no chances. Heavy shells, laid on the floor and along the sides, exploded,
ripping off the turret and tearing the hull along weld seams. Vasily Udalov's crew approaches a neighboring machine. The tank stands, barrel buried in the ground. On the armor is black soot around a small, neat hole in the side. A cumulative jet. Hatches are open. No one came out. "Petrov's crew?" asks the driver, taking off his helmet. "Yes," answers one of the approaching infantrymen. "Yesterday morning. Faustnik from the basement."
Burned instantly. Tankers silently take off their helmets. Wind stirs matted hair. No tears. Tears dried up back at Kursk. There is only a dull, aching emptiness. They drank spirits with these guys from one flask before the attack, shared the last rusk. And now some stand on the cobblestones, feeling the warmth of the sun, while others have become part of history, fused with the metal of their machine. "Need to drink to them," the commander says quietly. They take out a flask. The alcohol is warm, nasty, but it is necessary to wash away the taste of burning in the mouth and unclench the stress vice squeezing the heart a little. The price of victory was forged not only at the front. In the rear, in design bureaus and factories, people paid the same price. Chief designer Joseph Cotten and his team worked in a mode that medicine would call incompatible with life. Chronic sleep deprivation, constant stress of responsibility, eating in snatches. Many leading engineers by 1945 had heart attacks and strokes behind them. Nikolai Dukov, the designer by whose hands this machine was created, slept 3 to 4 hours a day throughout the entire war. His body was exhausted, no less than a soldier's in a trench. They died early, burning out at work like fuses in a high-voltage circuit. Their hearts stopped, unable to withstand the overloads of the arms race. But they created a shield that saved the nation. And the metal, it held. The mechanic strokes the tank's road wheel. Deep scratches, dents from fragments, traces of ricochets are visible on the steel. The machine looks beaten, screens torn off, fenders bent, headlights smashed. But she is alive. She breathes the heat of the cooling engine. She fulfilled her function, delivered these 4 alive to the destination, grinding up everything along the way that tried to kill them. The crew sits right on the curb, among broken brick and casings. They look at their tank, not as equipment, but as a living creature that took the pain meant for them. "You know," says the gunner, looking at the soot-covered muzzle brake, "if not for this caliber, we would be lying somewhere near the Vistula right now." "Say thanks to those who invented it," nods the commander. "And to those women who turned the shells." In this phrase is the whole essence. The IS-2 became the top of a pyramid, at the base of which lay millions of calloused hands, torn backs, and stopped hearts. It was a collective feat, cast in the form of 46 tons of alloy steel. In the evening, when the smoke finally begins to clear over Berlin, crews write letters home. Hands tremble, letters come out crooked. Alive, healthy, the war is over. 3 short sentences. But behind them stands an abyss of experienced horror and overcoming. They do not yet know that their tank will become a legend, that their names will be carved on granite slabs. Right now, they just want to sleep. Sleep in silence, not expecting the command to battle. They lie down right on the tarp spread on the engine deck. The heat of the engine warms them. The steel giant, which was their weapon and home, now guards their sleep. The war is over, but the scars, on the armor and on the souls, will remain forever. This is the price that had to be paid for the right to live, a price measured in iron and blood. September 1945, Berlin, Charlottenburg Highway. The war is officially over, but the air still trembles with tension. The Allies are holding a victory parade. American, British, and French troops pass in orderly columns, demonstrating their equipment. They smile. They are relaxed. For them, this is the finale, a celebration, a showing of flags. But then the horizon darkens. A rumble is heard that vibrates the cobblestones and shakes the glass in surviving windows. It is not the growl of light motors.
It is the heavy, bass rumble of diesel hearts. Soviet heavy tanks roll onto the highway. They move in perfect formation. Wide tracks, powerful cast turrets, long barrels with characteristic muzzle brakes. The Allies stop smiling. Generals in foreign uniforms standing on the podiums grow somber. At that moment, they see not just allies. They see a force with which it is impossible to argue. They see the machinery that ground up the Wehrmacht and reached the center of Europe. The IS-2 and the IS-3 that soon replaced them did not just parade that day. They drew a line. They showed the world who is the master of the continent. It was a demonstration of absolute engineering and military superiority. 122 millimeters of caliber looked forward, and this gaze cooled the hottest heads in the headquarters of yesterday's partners. A new era began, the era of the Cold War. But the foundation of Soviet security was poured with precisely this heavy metal.
Years passed. Tanks that burned near Tarnopol, stormed Poznan, and crushed barricades in Berlin began to leave the stage. Their engines wore out their resources, barrels lost accuracy from thousands of shots. But these machines were not sent to the smelter. They were sent into eternity. Across Europe, from the Volga to the Elbe, IS-2s drove onto pedestals. It is a strange sight. A combat machine, created for mud, blood, and fire, freezes in unnatural immobility. It is painted in parade green, road wheels are whitewashed, flower beds are planted around, children play. But if you get closer and touch the armor, you can feel a cold that does not depend on the weather. It is the cold of memory. Every such monument is not just a piece of iron. It is the materialized will of the people. It is a monument to engineering genius that managed to create a masterpiece in inhuman conditions. The names of the creators often remain in the shadow.
We know the name of the tank, but we forget those who drafted its nodes at night.
And yet these were people who risked their heads for every millimeter of armor. Joseph Yakovlevich Kotin, the icebreaker man, an organizer who knew how to secure resources, argue with marshals, and take responsibility when the price of a mistake was execution. He understood that a tank is not just a set of mechanisms, but a unified system. It was his will that forced industry to work in a single rhythm. Fyodor Fyodorovich Petrov, the god of artillery, the man who achieved the impossible, fitted a powerful field howitzer into a cramped tank turret. His decision on the 122mm D-25 T-gun became key. He gave tankers a long arm that allowed them to hit the enemy without entering his zone of confident destruction. Without Petrov, the IS-2 would have remained simply a thick-skinned target. Nikolai Fyodorovich Shashmurin, the transmission genius.
It is not enough to arm and protect a tank. It must be made to drive.
Shashmurin created mechanisms that moved 46 tons of weight off-road. His gearboxes, his final drives, worked where German steel broke. He made sure this monster was controllable, mobile, and reliable. These people did not wear headsets. They did not burn in tanks. But their battle at the drafting tables was no less brutal. Heart attacks, strokes, nervous breakdowns. This was their payment for victory. Their front passed through blueprints and workshops, and they held this front.
The IS-2 monument is also a monument to logistics and labor. Looking at the cast turret, one must see not only the form, but also the content. And the content is the labor of tens of thousands of women and teenagers in the Urals. It is the cold workshops of Chelyabinsk. It is the trains going west. The tank on the pedestal is the tip of a giant iceberg consisting of human self-sacrifice. Time is merciless.
Veterans are leaving.
Those who remembered the smell of red-hot oil inside the fighting compartment,
Who heard the clack of the breech, who shouted fire into the throat mic, are leaving us. Their voices fall silent. Only the metal remains. But this metal is more eloquent than any words. Walk up to an IS-2 standing in the square of any city. Look at the scar of the weld seam on the hull nose. It is the trace of technology born in a deficit of time. Look at the massive muzzle brake. It is the instrument that put a period in arguments with fascism. Look at the thickness of the armor. It is the guarantee that the crew could survive a direct hit. The tank is a time capsule. Inside it, behind welded hatches, the air of 1945 remains forever. There, in the darkness of the fighting compartment, live the ghosts of commands, fear, rage, and triumph. The IS-2 became a symbol that the impossible is possible.
In 1943, it seemed the German menagerie was invincible, that their equipment was perfect and optics precise. But Soviet engineers and workers proved there is no steel that cannot be smashed if sufficient kinetic energy and unbending will are applied to it. This tank was not perfect. It was cramped. It had a small ammo load. It was heavy to maintain. But it was perfect for its task. The task of survival and destruction. It was the hammer with which victory was forged. Not a scalpel, not a rapier, but precisely a heavy, rough hammer. Today, when we look at these machines, we should not feel endearment. War is not a parade. It is dirt, pain, and death. And the IS-2 is a child of this death. It is terrifying. Its silhouette radiates threat even 80 years later. And that is right. A monument should remind not only of triumph, but also of the price. Of thousands of burnt crews, of widows who received death notices,
Of the fact that peace is a fragile state, that sometimes has to be defended with the help of 46 tons of arguments. History is cyclical. Technologies change, drones and rockets appear, but principles remain the same. Armor and shell, will and fear. The IS-2 stands on its pedestal as an eternal reminder. If the enemy comes with a sword, he will be met by a caliber that leaves no chance for appeal. The final chord of this symphony of diesels and gunpowder sounds in silence. The roar of battles has quieted, the smoke has cleared, but the steel fist remains clenched. It froze on the pedestal, ready at any moment to remind the world who exactly broke the back of the Nazi beast. It was not just a tank. It was a verdict, cast in metal and carried out by a generation of victors. And as long as this metal stands under rain and snow, the memory of that feat will live, solid as armor steel, and eternal as the glory of Russian arms.